The courthouse parking lot shimmered in the late morning sun, heat radiating off the asphalt. Marcus Hayes eased the sleek black unmarked cruiser into a space near the entrance. He cut the engine, checked his watch, and reached for a folder in the passenger seat. It was just another routine morning for him. Meetings, paperwork, and a briefing with city officials. But the calm didn't last. A sharp voice sliced through the hum of traffic. "Hey! Step out of the vehicle right now!" Marcus looked up to see a uniformed patrol officer marching toward him, hand resting on his belt. The young officer's jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. His tone wasn't the clipped professionalism of routine procedure. It was louder, harsher, almost accusatory. "This lot is for official vehicles only," the officer barked, pointing at the cruiser. "You can't just park here. Move it before I call it in." Marcus opened the door slowly, stepping out with measured calm. He was dressed in a dark suit, his tie neat, his shoes polished. Nothing about him matched the officer's mental picture of a trespasser. Still, the hostility in the man's eyes didn't waver. "I believe I'm allowed to park here," Marcus said evenly, holding the folder against his side. His voice was calm, low, the kind of tone that carried authority without needing to shout. The officer scoffed, circling the car like a wolf sizing up prey. "Allowed? In this vehicle? This is a patrol car, not yours. Don't insult my intelligence." A few people on the sidewalk slowed to watch, curiosity pulling them closer. The courthouse entrance buzzed as attorneys and staff came and went, but now their attention shifted toward the confrontation. Marcus drew in a steady breath. He had been in hundreds of tense encounters before, but rarely with himself on the receiving end. He could feel the weight of the stares, the unspoken assumptions swirling in the air. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match the officer's aggression. He simply stood tall beside the car, his calm presence a stark contrast to the storm brewing in front of him. The officer jabbed a finger toward the vehicle again. "I don't know how you got your hands on this car, but you're going to regret it if you don't move it now." Marcus's eyes didn't flinch. His words were measured, deliberate. This car is exactly where it's supposed to be. But in that moment, no one around him believed it. Not the officer, not the murmuring bystanders, not even the few who had pulled out their phones to record. The truth, however, was waiting. And when it surfaced, the whole scene would turn upside down. The young patrol officer squared his shoulders, his voice rising to carry across the lot. "Don't play games with me. License and registration." Now Marcus kept his posture steady, the folder still tucked neatly under his arm. "Officer," he said evenly, "you don't need to raise your voice. I'm not resisting. But I assure you—" "Don't assure me," the officer snapped, cutting him off. His hand hovered closer to his radio, fingers twitching. "You're standing next to a city vehicle you have no business with. One wrong move and I'll call for backup." The words carried like a spark in dry grass. People on the sidewalk slowed, some stopping outright. A few reached for their phones, recording the scene with quick, furtive movements. Their faces showed the same expression, curiosity mixed with unease. Marcus could feel the heat of the stares on his back. He had led hundreds of officers, trained dozens in de-escalation. And yet here he was, the target of a rookie's unchecked suspicion. "Sir," Marcus said calmly, choosing every word with precision, "this isn't what you think." But the officer wasn't listening. His voice grew louder, sharper. "Don't tell me what I think. You're stalling. You better have some ID on you, because right now, you look like a car thief caught red-handed." A ripple of murmurs swept through the small crowd gathering near the courthouse steps. One man whispered, "That's a city cruiser, isn't it?" Another replied, "Looks like it." "Wonder what's going on?" The officer turned toward them, gesturing with a quick mocking wave. "This guy thinks he's got the right to park here, in a patrol car no less. Can you believe that?" A few nervous chuckles broke out, the kind people make when they don't know if it's safe to laugh, but the tension demands release. Marcus stood still, his eyes calm but steady, watching the officer's performance play out like a stage act. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply let the silence stretch, waiting for the right moment. Inside, though, his patience had limits. Every second of this charade wasn't just an insult to him. It was a lesson in how quickly respect could vanish when bias took the wheel. And still, Marcus said nothing. Not yet, because the truth was coming, and when it arrived, it would silence the laughter in an instant. By now, the courthouse steps had become an audience. Lawyers in pressed suits, clerks with files tucked under their arms, even a few civilians waiting for hearings, all paused to watch. The heat of the morning mixed with the heat of attention, pressing down on Marcus as though the entire city had turned to stare. The patrol officer thrived on it. His voice grew louder, more theatrical. He jabbed a thumb at Marcus and barked, "This guy really thinks he belongs here," standing next to a cruiser like it's his. He turned to the crowd, fishing for laughter. "What's next? You gonna tell me you're the chief?" Nervous chuckles rippled through the onlookers. A few shook their heads, others smirked as if they'd just been given a free show. Phones tilted higher, recording every second. Marcus stood motionless, his jaw set, his eyes steady. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He had worn a uniform for 20 years, had walked precinct halls, led raids, comforted grieving families, and sworn to protect this city. Yet here he was, a spectacle for strangers, reduced to nothing more than a punchline. "Don't just stand there," the officer barked again. "Show me ID. If you're really somebody, prove it. Otherwise, I'll call this in and you'll be riding in the back of a real patrol car before the hour's up." The murmurs thickened. The crowd leaned in, hungry for the unfolding drama. Marcus let the silence hang for a beat, his patience measured, his dignity intact. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, but carrying enough weight to cut through the noise. "You want proof," he said evenly. "You'll have it." The officer sneered, rolling his eyes. "Can't wait to see this. Everybody, watch closely. This'll be good." Laughter flickered again from the edges of the crowd. For Marcus, the sting wasn't in the sound itself, but in what it revealed. How quickly strangers could believe the worst. How fast mockery could replace respect. He tightened his grip on the folder under his arm. He had no need to raise his voice, no need to match arrogance with anger. The truth he carried would speak louder than anything else, and when it did, the smirks around him would vanish. The officer folded his arms, smirking as if he'd already won. "All right then," he said loudly, glancing at the crowd. "Let's see this miracle ID. Show us who you really are." Marcus exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that steadied storms. Without another word, he set the folder on the roof of the cruiser, flipped it open, and withdrew a slim leather case. He held it with care, then opened it so the sun caught the glint of the badge inside. The murmurs stilled. "Marcus D. Hayes," he said evenly. "Patrol Chief. This vehicle is assigned to me." The officer's smirk cracked, his mouth twitching like he'd misheard. He leaned forward, squinting at the ID. But the badge, the photo, the name, all of it matched perfectly. The credentials were unmistakable, official down to the embossed seal. Marcus reached into the folder again, pulling out a second document, a set of clearance papers bearing the courthouse seal and his signature. He laid them gently on the roof beside the badge. "Scheduled meeting with city officials today at 10:30. This car, this space." This time, the crowd erupted in gasps and low exclamations. Phones, once raised in mockery, now zoomed in with sudden gravity. A lawyer in the front whispered, "Oh my God, he is the chief." The officer's face drained of color. His eyes darted from the badge to the car, to the papers, and finally to Marcus's calm, unblinking gaze. "You," his voice stumbled. "You're Chief Hayes?" Marcus closed the badge case with a quiet snap. "Yes, and I've been trying to tell you that since the moment you shouted at me." The words landed heavier than any gavel. The crowd, moments ago entertained, now shifted in uncomfortable silence, the weight of realization sinking in. And the young officer, who had strutted and shouted, stood exposed before the very man who commanded the badge he wore. The air in the courthouse parking lot shifted in an instant. The nervous chuckles that had peppered the confrontation evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. For a heartbeat, all that could be heard was the low hum of traffic from the street beyond. Then, the whispers began. "He's the chief? Wait, the Chief Hayes? Oh my God, we were laughing at the patrol chief." Phones that had been raised for entertainment now trembled in hands, their owners realizing they had captured something far more serious than a parking dispute. Attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. Even the clerks, who had lingered on the courthouse steps, shrank back, ashamed of how quickly they had bought into the officer's accusations. The young officer's face had gone pale. His bravado collapsed like paper in rain. He stammered, his words broken. Chief Hayes, I didn't know. Marcus fixed him with a steady gaze. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs with precision. That much is clear. The officer swallowed hard, his hand still hovering near his belt, as though it could anchor him. I thought you were, I assumed that this car couldn't belong to me? Marcus asked quietly. The question lingered, sharper than any rebuke. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, many suddenly looking anywhere but at the two men in the center of the lot. The officer's mouth opened, then closed again. Words failed him. For Marcus, there was no satisfaction in watching him squirm, only disappointment. Disappointment in how fast the assumptions had flown, how quickly suspicion had eclipsed respect, how easily the crowd had chosen laughter over fairness. The silence deepened, heavy and unyielding, and in that silence, every person watching began to feel the weight of what they had just witnessed. The officer stood frozen, his face drained of color, the weight of his mistake pressing down harder with each second. Around them, the crowd stayed hushed, their phones still raised, but their expressions heavy with regret. The performance had ended, and the reality was brutal. The man the officer had mocked, shouted at, and threatened was his commanding chief. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority filled the silence like a steady drumbeat. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on the young officer. Respect, he said evenly, is not optional. It doesn't depend on uniforms, on age, or on who you think fits in the driver's seat. The words carried across the lot, measured and deliberate. Professionalism is not about how loud you can shout, Marcus continued. It's about how well you can listen, about how carefully you judge before you act. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes darting nervously toward the cameras recording every word. His posture had collapsed, his earlier swagger gone. Marcus straightened his folder under his arm and spoke for everyone now, not just the man in uniform. Authority isn't proven by threats. It's proven by integrity, by restraint, by the ability to treat every person, with the same dignity you expect for yourself. The murmurs of the crowd shifted, no longer mocking but reflective, somber. A few lowered their phones, ashamed to have recorded what now felt less like entertainment and more like a lesson they were complicit in needing. Marcus let the silence breathe before finishing. His voice was low, but every syllable rang like a gavel striking wood. You wear this badge to protect, not to belittle, to serve, not to shame. Never forget that. The officer lowered his head, his jaw trembling, a single word escaping in a near whisper. Yes, Chief. And in that moment, the balance of power wasn't just restored, it was redefined. The crowd lingered in silence, the kind that weighs heavier than noise. The courthouse doors had stopped swinging. Even the busy downtown streets seemed to fade beneath the gravity of the moment. All eyes were fixed on Marcus Hayes, the man who had just turned a public humiliation into a powerful reminder of what leadership looks like. The young officer shifted uneasily, his chest rising and falling fast. His earlier swagger had evaporated, replaced by shame that seemed to redden his very uniform. At last, he stepped forward, his voice trembling but sincere. Chief Hayes, I'm sorry, he said, bowing his head. I disrespected you and I disrespected the badge. I let my assumptions lead instead of my training. Marcus studied him quietly. The folder was still under his arm, his stance calm, his face unreadable. After a long pause, he gave a single nod. An apology matters, Marcus said evenly, but growth matters more. Don't let this be a story about embarrassment. Let it be the day you learned what it really means to wear that uniform. The officer's eyes glistened. He nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, Chief. The crowd shifted, some lowering their phones, others bowing their heads as though they too had been corrected. A murmur of respect rippled through them, replacing the earlier whispers of mockery. Marcus turned back to his car, placing his badge case neatly inside. He didn't gloat. He didn't bask in vindication. Instead, he slid into the driver's seat with the same quiet composure he had carried through the storm. Before closing the door, he looked once more at the crowd. Respect doesn't come from rank or title, he said. It comes from how you treat people when you think no one is watching. The words lingered like smoke in the air, settling into the minds of everyone present. Then, he closed the door, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind silence, reflection, and a lesson no one in that parking lot would ever forget. And as the black cruiser disappeared into the midday traffic, the smirks were gone, the whispers replaced with reverence. Chief Hayes hadn't demanded respect. He had earned it.